All right, welcome back to the program. You know, what you want in life is to be surrounded by friends who've got your back, and sometimes you want to be the person that has to have your friends back. And when you do it at a great level, it doesn't matter what the rest of your output is. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. Doesn't matter. None of that matters. Are you a good friend? Are you a good person? And the next guest is definitely that guy. He's also complicated a lot of parents' lives because he's the one that turned a comic book collection into an empire. Movies, reality series, thus giving kids ammunition against their parents. Every day they go buy a new one. You may know him as Silent Bob. He won't be silent tonight. Kevin Smith!
I'm very good.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. This is weird and cool for me. I don't know how to say this without sounding condescending, but I'm so proud. We met, if you remember, it's probably going back to, it was right around the time of Clerks 2, because I still had that office over near Sunset Boulevard. And you were coming out here, I don't even know if you were doing a bunch of interviews, but like you kept saying, I want to interview, and I hadn't met you prior to that.
Right.
And you came out to the office, we sat down, did an interview, like on the porch. You were so amenable about doing it wherever we were doing it. And you made me so damn comfortable. It was like one of the first times I was like, oh, these one-on-ones could be really fun. Like normally when you're on the interview circuit, you go through the junkets and they're kind of grueling. I love to talk, so it doesn't matter. But it's always, as you can see, you haven't even started talking yet. It's your show.
It's our show, bro.
So for the moment, it's my show. I love the talking, but it's so much better to have a conversation. So you and I did that. There was no like, we got to get through this in 5 minutes, I'm out of here. We just chatted for a long, long time.
I remember when I first started seeing your films thinking, right, this is a guy who speaks my language, our language. This was a filmmaker that we used to read about. You used to read about the generations of filmmakers that told stories the audience could connect to and felt like it was their voice. You were our guy.
Really?
Yeah, you and Tarantino, man. You were the guys that told us.
Well, that I could get because it's like I don't write about epic things. Quentin would write about bank robberies or like drug deals gone awry and needles into chests. I'm the guy that writes movies about, I saw a movie about a drug deal. You know, like
but they're both huge parts of our life. Hey, by the way, next year's 20 years, man.
We are. We're coming
Clerks.
up on 20 years for Clerks, 20 years that I've been doing this professionally. When we made the deal to sell the movie, they bought it in perpetuity here in the United States, but abroad, in England, we got it back, I think it was in 25 years. And me and Scott Mosier, my producer, would joke about like, yeah, man, in 25 years, we own Clerks in England. What's that gonna be worth? It's worth a lot now.
Yeah.
Like, it really turned into something. Like in the beginning, we all talked about being independent. Like, I'm an indie filmmaker, I don't need no studio help, and I'll do it by myself, tell stories I wanna tell, the hell with everybody else. Until we were done, then we were like, I gotta sell this, will you buy it? I'm sorry about all that stuff I said about it being independent. So I never really felt truly like an independent filmmaker, except that first time that I made Clerks.
Right.
And that was like when there was no expectation, there was no like, I'm gonna sell this and enter the business. We made it as a calling card movie, simply to say to somebody in the future, look, man, we know how to move a camera around, put images together. Will you give us money to do this next time so I don't have to put it on credit cards? And so like I kind of entered the business with piss and vinegar and love with art, you know? Like I'd seen Richard Linklater's movie Slacker on my 21st birthday. That made me want to go into filmmaking.
Let's play a Slacker clip.
Yeah,
We have a
show a
Slacker
clip.
What do you do to earn a living?
You mean work? To hell with the kind of work you have to do to earn a living. All it does is fill the bellies of the pigs who exploit us. Hey, look at me, I'm making it.
You remember seeing that film?
I saw it with my friend Vinny Pereira. Vinny Pereira, who I worked with at Quick Stop, and we didn't talk to each other for like 4 or 5 months that I was working there. I'd be like, hey, Vin. He's like, real emo kid. Went right in the back, did his job, and then at night we'd close and walk away from each other. This is around the time of Twin Peaks, and so I was recording it on VHS tapes. So I'd bring in the VCR, TV, and I'd sit there and watch Twin Peaks, man, and Vinny comes in one night, and for the first time in 6 months, he stops dead. And he said, you like Lynch? I said, David Lynch? Oh, I love David. I love Twin Peaks, man. I was a big fan of Blue Velvet and stuff like that. And suddenly that began this friendship, and we started talking, and he talked about wanting to be a filmmaker. And I'd never met anyone like that before. You know, my brother's gay. He's been gay for, well, forever, since he was born, but he's been married to a dude for 20 years. He didn't wait for the country to be like, you can get married. He's like, I'm gonna marry who I want. And he did it in a Unitarian church 20 years ago. He talks about the moment he realized he was gay, like the moment it all fit and whatnot, and he was talking to other people, and it makes it even more clear when you talk to other cats who have similar like-minded feelings to yourself. That's what I kind of had with Vincent. It was like coming out in film, because suddenly it was like meeting a guy in the bathroom and tapping under the stall. like we had this thing in common. Like, you like Lynch, you know? I like Lynch.
You're a super politician.
Very, very. So, like this, totally. You see that? I've worked the bar. So, so suddenly I had this buddy, like, I had friends, we would talk movies, but this guy talked film. He was like my first film school teacher. So he wanted to make films, and I was like, I can write. I'll write the movies. You make them. This will be great.
How'd you know you could write?
My sister, when I was a little boy, my sister, I saw her with this composition notebook. She was always writing in it. And one day I grabbed it from her and I opened it. And it was all this writing, you know, like all work, no play makes Jack a dull boy. Just pages and pages of writing and stuff. And I was like, what is this? And she's like, I'm writing a book. And I was like, what do you mean you're writing a book? She's like, well, I'm writing a book about me and my friends, and we go on an adventure. And I was like, you can't just write a book. Like, what will the government say? Like, you know, I didn't understand, like, because I was like, this is a book, and I had books all around me, and I was like, this is not a book. And she's like, anybody can write a book, Kevin. Like, these books have been published, but before they were this, they were this. And I was like, ah. So it always kind of lodged in my mind, like, anybody can do this, anybody could write. So years later, we were going to go see my relatives, and I hated going to see my relatives. We'd always do it on the weekends. So I started writing on the big electric typewriter these kind of like Gene Shepard-esque essays about going to my relatives' house. Everything's larger than life. They're all monsters and stuff like that to some degree. Very satirical for a young age. I think I was about 11 at this point. And so I typed one up. It was about 5 pages, and I gave it to my brother, first audience member I ever had. And he was like, what are you doing? I said, I'm writing a story. And he's just like, you can't just write a story, you know what? And I said, Virginia said we could do this kind of thing. So I said, here, take this. And so he read it, and he started laughing. Like, on the first page, he started laughing. Then when he got to my descriptions of my aunts and stuff, he was laughing even more.
How did you feel when you heard that?
Amazing. That was like the waking up moment of a storyteller. Film would come way later, but at this moment, I was like, writing. Like, I can write a story and I could get this kind of reaction. I respected my brother, still do. He's 4 years older than me to the day. I was born on his birthday. My sister was born August 10th, the 1 year prior to that. We got 5 years between us, so my parents love to have sex in November. So I looked up to him. He was a
Jersey
hero.
November, what else are you gonna do?
Totally. It's also after every election. Like, we lost, let's do it. So I'd always looked up to him, and the fact that I could make him laugh, this is magic, this is what I want. So I always thought I'd be a writer. When I went to college in New York, I went for writing. My biggest dream was I wanted to write for Saturday Night Live. I was a huge SNL fan. So while I was living in New York, I was just like, every day after class, I'll walk uptown, sit in the lobby of 30 Rock, and wait to be discovered. Just thought Lorne Michaels would walk by and be like, that fat kid's hysterical, you know, and the journey would begin. And
Never happened?
Never happened.
Did you ever even see him?
I never even saw famous people, dude. Like, I never saw anybody coming out. I was like, are you sure this is where it all happens? So I eventually gave that up, and never thought about working at SNL after that. Like, I kind of crashed and burned in my mind in New York in 1989 after I graduated high school in '88. I went to try to accomplish something and checked out early. I'd started hanging out with my friends Walter and Brian at that point. Walter Flanagan particularly was the guy that was like, here, man, read comics. He gave me a copy of Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. I used to love him as a kid, but now I'm like, oh my, this is what a comic book is now? The next thing Walter gives me is hockey. He's a huge Devils fan. They've been in our state for about 7 years at that point. And so he was an ardent follower, and so he taught me about hockey. He also taught me how to play hockey. So it was those friendships, man, that kind of fueled everything. And it's 20 years ago now.
Stick around. I will. More with Kevin right after this. Okay.
More with the man behind Chasing Amy, Mallrats, and Dogma next.
At the back here, we're hanging out with Kevin Smith. Your parents didn't dig what you did for a living, right?
No, not at first. They didn't quite understand it. We didn't come from doers or anything like that. My parents, wonderful people.
Unless it's November.
Yes, then they were doing it like crazy, as we found out. But they weren't like real achievers. My mom stayed home, take care of the kids. My dad worked at the post office, a government job. So my parents were like products of the like, get a job, pay for your, you know, what your dream, which is to get married, have kids. So when I said, hey, I want to be a filmmaker, they weren't like, absolutely not. They just thought it was like some phase I'd go through. And they knew it was an expensive phase, because like, that doesn't sound cheap or anything like that. But I didn't bug them for money. You know, I'd had credit cards that I'd kind of put together in a contest with my friend Brian Johnson to see who could get more credit cards and stuff like that. And I'd amassed about 12, you know, because I worked at RST Video, the video store in Clerks, and I would put on my application, I was the manager at RST Video, I made $50,000 a year. And so they would call that number, which is RST, and I'd answer, I'd be like, hello? And they were like, yeah, we're doing a finance check on Kevin Smith. I was like, oh, our manager, he makes $50,000 a year. And they're like, good to know, thanks. And so they'd send me credit cards like crazy. And I never used them because my parents were like, don't use plastic, we're a cash-only family. And then one day I was like, ooh, maybe I could use these to finance the dream. So my parents, you know, their mindset, I talked to my brother at one point. I was like, what does mom and dad say about me doing this movie stuff? And my brother said, they say you'll kind of get out of your system, you'll wind up working at a restaurant or something like that. I was like, okay, good to know. They have a backup plan.
But that didn't piss you off? Like,
not at all. But why would they know? I might as well have gone into my parents and said, I'm going to go to the moon and be an astronaut.
Fair enough.
Like,
yeah.
It was so outside of the realm of possibility for our world. So for them, I'm sure they were just like, here he goes again. But when it mattered, when I really needed it and they came through in a big bad pinch, we had been using credit cards to pay for everything, right up until the time we were about to start. Spirit Corp, the company we rented our equipment from, we rented this old Arri SR2, very loud camera, a 16 millimeter. We had to pay cash for it. They wouldn't take credit cards. And I didn't have cash, man. So it was gonna be $3,000 to rent the camera for 3 weeks. So I turned to my parents and I was just like, look, if we don't do this, this is the crucial part. Like, we got everything ready. I've got Scott Mosier, my producer, Dave Klein, they've flown out to make this movie. We've been rehearsed, but we can't shoot it without cameras. Like, do you guys have any loot? My parents, like, didn't have a lot of money. I think at that point my father was making like maybe $21K a year or something like that. So my parents were like, we got $3,000 and that's all we got, and that's our nest egg and that's everything. So I was like, if you could spare it, man, I'll try to get it back. So they gave me the cash. They believed enough to be like, here. But, you know, when they finally saw the movie, my mom wasn't like, oh my God, you've done it, my son, you know. Not at all, not at all. I showed him the flick, and after the credits rolled, you know, I was like, what do you think? And my mom was like, you spent $28,000 on that piece of garbage? Because all anyone does is curse. That was the first thing she said. She's like, everyone's gonna think that I taught you all those horrible words. She thought of how it would reflect on her. So when the movie got picked up, we went to Sundance and whatnot. When it first got into the festival, then she was like, oh, well, is this something? And I was explaining, like, it's kind of a big deal. Everyone knows what Sundance is now, then not so much. Right. So I was explaining, like, this is a good thing. They only picked 16 movies, and we were one of them. Like, what are the chances, man? They had 400 entries, so that's got to mean something good. And I've heard of movies going to Sundance, like Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and being picked up. So I don't know, maybe that's in the cards for us or something like that. So suddenly there was kind of hope, and my mom was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, people like this movie of yours, even though they curse so much? I'm like, Ma, they like it because they curse so much. So I went to Sundance, and then the rest was kind of history, man. Like, Harvey Weinstein bought the flick, and I remember calling my mom as soon as the deal was done, and I was like, you could rest easy. I'm gonna give you back your money. I'm gonna pay off all my credit cards. She's like, what happened? I was like, that man, Harvey Weinstein, Miramax, they bought the movie. She's like, oh my God, thank God he has such bad taste.
And none of that ever held you back?
No, it was always done with affection. She was never like one of these parents who kick you when you're down or something like that.
What about your dad?
Dad was different. Dad was the kind of guy who, he's very supportive, but not like, you can follow your dreams, son. Do anything you want in life. Like, my parents weren't from that school of thought. My father was the kind of guy who was like, see that mountain, son? Never climb it, you know?
Stick around. More with Kevin after this.
All right, next on Stroumboulopoulos, lots to talk about still with Kevin Smith.
We're back here. We've got Kevin Smith with us. So Your father, it's 10 years since your father passed
10
away?
year, we just passed the 10-year anniversary, and we come from a pretty Catholic family. So that's, we as much as you celebrate people's birthdays, you also like mark the day they died. Like we had this calendar in my kitchen growing up, and my friends would come over and they would be like, wow, you know a lot of people with birthdays, because my mom would write on the calendar. And I was like, those people are dead. Those are all relatives who've passed away. So it's like Aunt Connie's anniversary,
right.
you know, Aunt Marie's anniversary. So death was always a big thing in our house. And my mom, from a young age, was always very terrified of death. I guess she went to Catholic school when she was a kid, and the nuns put the fear of death into her in a big bad way. Not a negative, like beating her with rulers way, but they didn't quite, you know, explain the concept of death well enough to her satisfaction that it didn't leave her terrified and clutching, you know, the couch with fear. So we were raised in a real fear-based environment.
Right.
And, you know, and, like we pulled our shades and curtains down at night. My father, like, didn't want anyone looking in the house. We were all home by 5 o'clock and whatnot, locked the doors, even though we lived in an insanely safe bedroom community. So I came from people that were, you know, kind of very obsessed with death. And then my mother, eventually, she was on the table and she died during an operation. She was getting a stent put in her heart, and she died. And she went out for like 3 minutes. And I talked to her about it. I was like, what was it like? And because for her, she'd been so terrified of dying her whole life, right? I said, what was it? And she goes, well, first thing I felt was like all the pressure was gone. Like I suddenly felt like, I don't know anybody anything, or I'm not responsible for anything. She's like, I felt so at peace. I was like, would you see a light and stuff like that? She goes, no, I was just kind of floating. I was like, you see dead people? She goes, no, but I knew I was dead. So I'm trying to explain like the latest theories to my mother and stuff and things I've read. And my mom's like, I don't know how else to explain it, but she's going, I was insanely comforted. I had been scared my whole life. But the peace that I felt, she was going, I really enjoyed it. And that came at a time where it was essential, because my father would pass away a couple of years later, and that was her best friend in life. They didn't have a network of people they hung out with. They lived for each other and for their kids. So when he left, like if she hadn't gone through that experience herself of knowing, oh, he'll be at peace or whatever, I don't think she could have made the transition to being a widow as well as she did, and even that took 5 years. Sure. He died in a kind of really wonderful, epic way. We were at dinner all together, the whole family. We were in Philadelphia. I was there at a Comic-Con. I was doing a Q&A. Whole family was there, my brother, my sister, my mom, and my dad. Afterwards, we all go out to eat at Morton's that night, the steakhouse, get a back room, and we're sitting around the table having a great time. Dad was just sitting back enjoying the heck out of it. You could tell, like as a parent now, it's very easy to read. Like they were like, we did it. We kept all 3 of these from being dead. Like that's your that's your job as a parent.
And
You're
they
just
like each other.
Yeah, they're getting along, they like us, we like them, and they're alive. We're done, you know. Such a fantastic night, and what we didn't notice was my old man, who had health problems. He'd had a couple heart attacks, a stroke as well, fought diabetes his whole life, diabetes 1 quite often. He, the whole night he's eating filet mignon. He's having like sneaking cheesecake while we're all talking. He's like, that's real funny. And he's eating some cheesecake. He threw back a couple Manhattans and stuff like that. So he had himself a real good old meal, and you could tell he was laughing. He enjoyed what he put together with this woman he met. Like, he felt really good about it and stuff. So we finished the meal and put him in a cab. I was going to a different hotel, and I was going to see him the next day. So I kissed him and I said, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Good night. And they went off. And then I got a phone call at like 5, 6 in the morning, and it was my brother. He called my hotel room. I was like, hello. And he's just like, you got to get down to the hospital. I said, what are you talking about? He's like, Dad's in the hospital. Get down to the hospital. There's a hospital at Walnut or something like that. So I hang up, and my wife's like, what's the matter? I was like, oh, my dad's in the hospital again. She's like, you know where it is? I think it's on Walnut. I'm going to go find it. It's a couple blocks away. I'll jump in a cab. And she's, you want me to go? I was like, stay. It's fine. He's always in there. So I get to the hospital. I walk into the emergency room door, and I saw the scariest thing I ever saw in my life. My mother, terrified and bargaining with God. Now, I'd seen my mother cry before, and I'd seen her be panicked, and, you know, I'd seen her be worried and stuff. I'd never seen this. She was sweating bullets, crying, just white as a ghost. And, you know, I could see her, and she could see me when I came in, and I was like, hey. And she said, Tiger. And then immediately, because that's what she calls me, then immediately went back into, oh, Jesus, God, no, please, not now. Please, Jesus, not now. Like, really emotional and stuff. So I'm looking at her, and I look to my brother. And my brother, you know, because my mother's turned now into my brother's embracing her. So I got my brother facing me, my mom's not. And I look at my brother, and my brother just gives it to me, goes. And suddenly I was like, no. And I go to the back where, you know, the emergency room, they lay out people and stuff. And there was a nurse there, and she goes, come on in. And my father's laid out on a stretcher, and he had an intubation tube in him and stuff. Still, you know, as a raincoat on the floor, man, he was just gone, no life in him. I'd experienced death and I'd lost relatives and stuff, but not someone who's so vital and who I'd just seen hours before, a living, massive person, having a great time and stuff. So I'd always spent time with my father growing up, watching a lot of TV. We only had like 3 channels in those days. One of them would play Bowling for Dollars. So we would always watch Bowling for Dollars, and he would lay kind of on his back on the floor, looking at the TV this way, and I would lay on top of his belly like this, watching the TV. And I was just struck by, like, this is it. At this point, I was like 33 years old. I was like, you're a 33-year-old man who's never gonna have the chance to do this again. You're not gonna weird him out if you're like, Dad, can I lay on your belly? Because he ain't here anymore. Go for it. And I just laid on his belly for the first time in a lot of years. And I was like, I'm alone. That's it. He's gone. So I went out and I saw my mom, and she was still processing it. And I went outside to have a cigarette. I was a cigarette smoker in those days. So I go, my brother comes out. I'm having a smoke and I offer him one. He's not a smoker. And I said, oh, right, we're half orphans now. I said, we're halfway to Batman. I was trying to make fun. And he goes, yeah, I guess so. I said, what was it like? Because my brother was there. He was sharing a room with my parents. And he goes, Dad died screaming. And I said, what? And he goes, Dad died screaming. And I said, what does that mean? He's going, I don't know how to make it any more clear. He's like, he woke up. He was complaining to Mom, like, sharply. He got right up. He was like, I'm hot, Grace, I'm hot. And he was pushing the sheets off him. And my mom was like, I don't understand. Like, we got the air conditioning on. Like, I'll get you water. She went to get him water. He bolted straight up in bed, and he was doing this stuff. And she was like, Donald, something's going on with your dad. My brother got in there, and he went to the bed. He's like, you all right? My dad wasn't responding. And he was holding my dad, and he said my dad seized up, and he was screaming. Oh. Right at the end. He was like, ah! Went down, like, screaming as if he was in a plane, and then gone. And that profoundly impacted me, because life doesn't care how cool you are. Life doesn't care that you made Clerks. Life doesn't care if you're a hero. You're going to go out that way. And I realized there's no point in this life in not trying to accomplish even the stupidest, dopiest dreams that you have, because you get one shot at it. Now, if you're someone out there going, my dopey dream is to kill children, I'm not talking to you.
Don't do that.
No, no, no.
Thank you so much, Kevin Smith.
Congrats.
We'll be right back.